Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on community wealth building. I'm Lynn Sharp, I'm from the Improvement Service. I'm a Communications Officer and I'll be doing the kind of technical side of the webinar today. Before I pass you on to Geraldine Campbell of Scottish Government, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping arrangements. So this webinar is being recorded, so if there are any technical issues or you have any connection issues or you just want to see it again or pass it on to colleagues who might be interested, it is being recorded and we will get the recording out to you in due course. There will be a question and answer section, so you can submit questions using the questions tab in GoToWebinar, and I'll read them out and direct them to the panel. And if you have any technical issues, just use the chat function to let me know and I'll do my best to help. So I'll now pass on to Geraldine.
Sorry, I'll just unmute myself, sorry. Thank you, Lynn. Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Geraldine Campbell. As Lynn says, I'm from the Economic Development Directorate of the Scottish Government. I am the policy lead there for community wealth building, and over the past few months I've been working alongside Neil McInroy, who is one of the speakers today. Neil has been seconded into the Scottish Government on a part-time basis to advise us on how we can help grow community wealth building across Scotland. I think it's safe to say during the time that Neil's been working with us, the interest in community wealth building has grown massively, both inside and outside of the organisation. I think the conversations that are taking place now have moved past interpretations of what inclusive growth or a wellbeing economy is or isn't, and what it does or doesn't look like. And the community wealth building conversations helped us to have a focus much more on what it means in practice and what we need to do in policy terms to enable better practice. And I think that's actually been really helpful. I think in the community wealth building space, we've also recognised the importance of local places and the need to understand what it means in a local place context. And that's why the work that's been taking place in North Ayrshire has been so important. And we're also going to hear about that from Councillor Cullinane today. It's not a coincidence that our commitment on community wealth building and the programme for government focuses on how we can learn from partnering with and working with a number of different local areas across Scotland. And I'm sure Neil will touch on a bit more of that in his presentation. But my job today is really just to introduce the speakers, and I'll do that now. I don't think we could probably get two more informed speakers who know community wealth building better in Scotland. We'll first hear from Neil McInroy, who is the Chief Exec of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, and in that capacity he's been advocating for community wealth building and delivering alongside partners for quite a number of years. But as I mentioned, Neil's also on part-time secondment to the Scottish Government, and it's in that capacity that he'll be presenting to you today. So we'll first hear from Neil, and then our second speaker, who almost needs no introduction, but Councillor Joe Cullinane is leader of North Ayrshire Council, and he's been at the forefront of the growth of community wealth building in Scotland. Under his leadership, North Ayrshire are the first council in Scotland to publish a community wealth building strategy. And more recently, they signed our Anchor Charter, which has all the big public sector anchor institutions across Ayrshire committing to community wealth building pledges. So once we hear from both speakers, we'll open up to a question and answer. I'll pass over to Neil and Joe now. Thanks.
Hello there. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Geraldine. And if Lynn does the first slide, be good. That's fantastic. And yeah, as Geraldine says, I've been seconded into the Scottish Government since July as a community wealth building advisor. And I have to say, I mean, I've never worked inside a national government before. I've worked alongside national governments, but not inside one. And I have to say, I mean, say what you want about national government. I've been really impressed by my colleagues and support and the intelligence really and the enthusiasm for which they've embraced this agenda. And it's been really heartening really. So thanks for everyone that's been involved in this so far. And of course, similarly across Scotland, a range of agencies as well as local authorities I've spoke to, they've been bob on and really enthusiastic about this agenda. So we can do good things in Scotland with this agenda, as we already are, and we can push on. So thanks very much, and I'll get cracking. Next one, please, Lynn. Yeah, so what is community wealth, Paul? Well, it's a people-centred approach to local economic development, which looks to make local economic and flow of wealth more socially and ecologically beneficial to communities and enterprises. Now, a lot of you out there will be familiar with economic development. I think that it's a maturing of economic development, if not a bit of a disruption, because what it's kind of saying is let's hotwire social and environmental benefits into how the economy works and who benefits from it. Now, implicit in that, and it's obviously in the wellbeing economic frame and inclusive growth frame of the Scottish Government, implicit is that, and we've not been doing as well as we could. We've still got enduring levels of poverty and wealth inequality and ecological crisis, as well as the ongoing pandemic. So this is about how do we actually bend and disrupt and change economic development to actually deal with the social and ecological ills that we face. Now, traditionally in economic development, we've talked about, haven't we, traditionally about redistribution of wealth. So we create the growth and then we redistribute it through transfer payments, regeneration and so on to poorer communities. Community wealth is about that, but it's also got a fundamental different direction. It's saying, let's actually think about pre-distribution. So in the actual workings of the economy, we're thinking about how poorer communities and people benefit. So it's pre-distribution. How do we think about hotwiring when the economy actually works? Yeah, not after, but during and before the actual creation of wealth and economic growth, we actually make sure that people are benefiting. So it's distribution, redistribution, as well as pre-distribution. Next one, please, Lynn. I've had a bit of tech problems this morning, so I would fire on, but I can't remember what the next slide is. It's a global movement. This is not just something that is just emergence a wee thing. It's a global movement, and it's aligned to those new economic movement, well-being economics. And I think in some way we should see this, folks, as practice arm of those bigger ideas of how we reset our economy to deal with the ills we've had and the contemporary problems we have, crises we have in terms of the pandemic. The phrase came about from the Democracy Collaborative, our good friends, the Democracy Collaborative, an American think tank, who focused on the decline in the Rust Belt and a big focus in Cleveland, Ohio, where they seen a huge drop in the population, a huge economic problems, and they felt they needed to focus in the pre-distribution of wealth, or the wealth they had through the big anchor organisations, the hospital and the university, and how they think differently about the economy. But if you take it even further back to when it's rooted, if you like, in things like Adam Smith, the theory of moral sentiments, where the actual act of trading, the actual way the economy functions, is a human act, an empathy between somebody that needs a good and service and somebody who produces that. And it's a relational act, an act of empathy between people who trade and want something. So it goes back very much further to our own roots, if you like, in Scotland. Also, it's got deep European socialist and social democratic roots, and also institutional economics, as well as welfarism, Keynesian. It has provenance, is what I'm saying here. A different provenance to neoclassical economics or neoliberal economics, but a different route. And that is what we're trying to push forward in terms of its aims. It's also aligned to new municipalist movements across Europe. For instance, what's happening in Barcelona and Catalonia and in French municipalities. This movement here is saying that the power of the local state should be able to, as an economic agent, shape the economy in different ways and pass power down, working with communities, passing power down to communities and other enterprises to have more of a stake and role in the economy. And it's also linked to other EU things like the EU URBAC programme on municipalities. So it has provenance and it's a global movement. And as Geraldine rightly said, Scotland is taking it forward nationally, and I think one of the first national governments to do so at that scale. Next one, please, Lynn. And all said and done about all that theory, it's just about plumbing, really. It's about economic plumbing. Where are the leaks and where does the money flow? If you think about money and wealth as like a hydrological system, where are the leaks? How much is going to external dividend payments to far distant shareholders? How much is going out of our local economy to international suppliers? We're looking to plug those leaks in our economy to make sure wealth flows and is more circulating through a particular locality. But it's also about the basins, the reservoirs. How do we capture that wealth? And that's what interests in community banks, credit unions, other forms of investment which actually capture that flow of wealth to make sure we can then recirculate it through our economy. So it's economic plumbing. Next one, please, Lynn. Why community wealth building Scotland? Well, I think it's seen as a practical means to deliver well-being economy and inclusive economic growth aspirations. And of course, it features in the programme for government. I think Geraldine would agree that since we've started on this journey, it's starting to deepen its roots within the policy architecture of Scotland, as well as deepen its roots out there in our communities and in local authorities. Next one, please, Lynn. So how are we actioning community wealth building in Scotland? Well, Scottish Government is assisting a rollout of community wealth building in 5 areas. There's obviously, and we'll hear from Joe later on, great work being done in North Ayrshire, and the Scottish Government will continue to support that work wherever we can. Also, south of Scotland, Clackmannanshire, Taste Cities, Glasgow City Region and Western Isles, and I'll talk about that in a moment. There's action plans being developed in those 5 areas, and it's a sort of snowballing plan here. This is not just a big strategy. It's plan, action, do, get outcomes, learn, show, repeat. It's a snowballing methodology. We're not going to get constrained or ground down by lots of heavy strategy and heavy process. We're trying to be nimble because this pandemic requires nimbleness and it requires response to the ongoing economic and social travails. So it's very much focused on maybe these action plans might have 20 actions, but we'll have a short-term ones of 2 or 3, 4 actions that can be done in the short term, say within a sort of 3 to 6 month period. Start to turn the dial on redirection of wealth and addressing some of those social problems. As I say, we're coordinating community wealth links across other Scottish Government policy areas. We're liaising with a range of public, private and community stakeholders, and obviously it plays into the recovery and reform of Scotland given the pandemic. Next one, please, Lynn. There's 5 pillars of community wealth building. I won't go on too much about this, I'm conscious of time, but basically it splits up community wealth building across 5 directions around wealth: financial power, land and property assets, procurement, spending, workforce, and also the key point here is to build this generative economy, to try and create an ecosystem of industry, enterprise activity where communities and individuals have a genuine stake, interest in co-ops, community interest companies, small and medium-sized enterprises, a range of entities which by their very nature help to lock wealth in, this pre-distribution point I was making earlier. Next one, please, Lynn. Just a few frequent asked questions we get about community wealth building. We get, we're doing it already. We don't need to do, we're doing it already, we're doing it. Well, you may be doing a bit of procurement, you may be doing a bit of land and property stuff, but you're not doing it all with deep intent across the 5 pillars. So it's about scaling here. It's about starting with, well, I'm doing that bit. It's like saying, what you're doing is brilliant. Let's do more and more of that. Let's really ramp it up. So it's more about veracity and kicking on across the 5 pillars. That's the key here. It's all about procurement, local spending, buying local. Well, that's an important pillar, but it's not the only pillar. there's land and property assets, there's workforce, there's this building, there's generative inclusive ownership models. That's also key. It's not just about procurement. People say, oh, it's just about community development. No, community welfare in a Scottish government sense is lodged within the Economy Directorate by design. Also, in terms of who we work with locally, it's with economic development, as well as corporate activities in a local authority. It's not a reband of community development. This is about economic change. It's about economic system change in part. Also, why not redistribute the wealth through tax system and transfer payments? Well, we've tried that. That's the whole point about pre-distribution. We need to think about the actual hot wiring into the actual function of the economy. It's just for urban areas. Well, it has had a focus on urban areas for sure, but it's not just for urban areas. We're seeing we've got work in Western Isles, as we said, south of Scotland, and also in England. There's a range of areas as well that's rural. It's not just an urban thing. You've heard of the Preston model. It was unique to Preston. You can't replicate the Preston model in Western Isles. It will be a different bespoke variation across those 5 pillars for the Western Isles, not the Preston model in the Western Isles. Next one, please, Lynn. We also got a question, oh, it's protectionist. Oh, yeah, yeah, this is all about local spending, protectionist. No, this is making sure we've got a diverse ecosystem of enterprises in a locality, yeah, who can actually be more fit to bid for those contracts. It's actually improving competition, not reducing competition. This is not protectionist. This is developing our economy. It's all about places. Well, it is in places, but it's also about sectors, our health sector, our housing sector. It's about that too. And that's how the national footprint and national policy comes in. It's shuffling the cards. It's no new growth. This is all about public spending. No, this is about actually growing a more diverse ecosystem that can start to compete and can start to build their own activity to start to do more and more things within an economy. It's small stuff. It's not the big ticket economic drivers. Many a mickle makes a muckle. Many a small thing makes a lot. It is small stuff, but it adds up to a hell of a lot. So it's not, and it does have links to those big economic drivers in terms of big infrastructural spending. Where is all that? Who gets the contracts for the big infrastructure? Is it resetting capitalism? Well, yes, it is. The Financial Times tells us capitalism needs a reset. I think this pandemic's told us it's maybe not completely abandoning capitalism, but it's certainly resetting it. Do we have time for this? We have a crisis. No time like the moment. I think this is it. This offers something different. We should be getting on with it. How are we doing for time, by the way, Lynn? Next slide, please. I'm all right for time. Joe, I'm not cutting into your time, huh? I'm all right. I'll fire on quickly. Just cut me off. Progress. Clackmannanshire. Full action plan started. It will be finished by end of November. Linked with the wellbeing pilot. Big ambition. Clackmannanshire. Fantastic people. Fantastic enthusiasm. There'll be a short, medium and long-term frame to those actions, weaving in other key anchors, particularly the Forth Valley. There's a gender inequality theme here in terms of inclusive ownership and women-owned firms. There's interest in the European new municipalist agenda there in terms of what's happening in Barcelona in terms of gender equality, land and property assets, deeper social and ecologic value of some of those assets, deepening community benefits element of procurement, and a real interest in diversifying the supply chain within Clackmannanshire and the wider Forth Valley. All early thoughts on that, but it's coming on good. Next one, please. Tay Cities, about to begin action planning. It will be completed by hopefully December, January. Don't hold me to that, but that's what we're working to. Focuses on Fife with wider learning across the Tay Cities through the Economic Developers Group. Full action plan woven into the existing progress. Fife already on the journey there, so it's trying to dovetail with what they're doing. An anchor network and interestingly place-based seminars to animate supply across the 7 or 9 areas that we have in Fife. Next one, please. Western Isles, an action plan again. Theme likely to be acceleration of existing community inclusive ownership within the economy. Huge community ownership of land in the Western Isles and extending that to other aspects of the economy potentially. Also linked to community service delivery and deepening of local democracy. a bit earlier there. They've not quite nailed it yet, but that's kind of what things are sort of emerging. Next one. Glasgow City Region action planning has just begun, working very closely in this with Glasgow City Region colleagues. Focus is 2 pillar themes, so it's not the whole pillars, it's only 2 of the themes. Looking at procurement and construction, looking at a unified approach across GCR around that, and then a focus on land and property assets, particularly vacant and derelict land, and opening the idea of a wider community wealth building focus on broadening productive use, not just financial return. Next one. South of Scotland, working up plan, hopefully get a decision next few weeks on that in terms of exactly what we would be focusing on. Seen as a key agenda for the South of Scotland and potential, given the development of the South of Scotland enterprise, 4 possible tranches, not worked through yet, maybe full community wealth building in one of the local councils or both local councils, focus on the anchor sector like housing, community wealth building proofing of South of Scotland operations. And there's a lot going on there anyway, and maybe we celebrate, amplify and accelerate existing community wealth building activity in the South of Scotland. Next one, please, Lynn. I think that's me. I think I'll finish there. I hope that's enough. I think I've taken maybe too much time. I'll pass you over to Joe now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Neil. I'm just going to try and share my slides. Hopefully this works. Are you able to see that?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, excellent. So thanks very much, Neil. As has been said, we are on. Oops, sorry, is that stopped?
We can still see the first slide. What does? Oh, yeah, we're back on PowerPoint. No, it's fine. If you just put it back on slideshow, we should be fine.
Right. Okay. Is that it?
Yeah.
Right. Perfect. As has been said earlier on, we are the first sort of council in Scotland, North Ayrshire, to sort of launch a community wealth building strategy. We launched our strategy in May, and for us in North Ayrshire, community wealth building is absolutely about using the economic levers available to anchor institutions to develop a more resilient and inclusive local economy. We do have a weak economy in North Ayrshire. We have a weak labour market. We have Scotland's lowest job density. The traditional economic model has left us with areas of this local authority having up to 1 in 3 children living in poverty. So the need for a new economic model was absolutely clear to us well before we ended up in this current COVID pandemic. And it just seems that we've done some of the preparatory work for how we might look at coming out of that pandemic more resilient and with a fairer and more inclusive economy, because this model is about enhancing well-being and it's about making the economy more fair. So community wealth building for us means more local employment, a more diverse and resilient business space, and ensuring that wealth is locally owned and benefits local people. Neil spoke about this 5 pillars of community wealth building: procurement, fair employment, land and assets, financial power and plural ownership. And our strategy, which I'll speak about in a minute, covers all those 5 pillars. But in terms of anchor institutions, and I know that Neil referenced this earlier on, but we see anchor institutions as organisations which are embedded within place. They are embedded within Ayrshire. They are loyal to Ayrshire and they are not going to up sticks and leave. They buy a lot, they employ a lot of people, and they own a lot of land and buildings. But what I would say, as Neil has said, is there will be a different model of community wealth building for different areas, and different places will have different anchors. For example, in Preston that Neil spoke about, they do have a university, so the university was a key anchor in that Preston model. We don't have a university embedded within Ayrshire. We do have a college, and therefore we certainly have different anchors to Matthew Brown in Preston. So for us, community wealth building is at the heart of everything that we do as a council. It's at the heart of our council plan. We've been on this journey for 2 years. We commissioned Neil and Claes to undertake a diagnostic report for us in 2019. And on the same day that we received that diagnostic report, we set out the sort of opportunities and potential for community wealth building in North Ayrshire and the wider Ayrshire region. We established and created a community wealth building commission of local anchors, and that commission has been now operating for a year. And in the last commission meeting a few weeks ago, we welcomed East Ayrshire and South Ayrshire councils onto the commission as well. So we now have representation in the commission from all the big public anchor institutions in Ayrshire, and we also have people like the third sector represented around that table as well. We have taken a bit of time in that 2 years to engage with our communities, but also taking the time to embed this within the culture of our council. A lot of time spent training, dispersing knowledge and giving learning to members of staff across the whole of the council, just to make sure that they understand the power that they have to create a better economy through their day-to-day roles within the council. So our strategy is very action orientated. It covers the 5 pillars. In total, it has 55 actions across them. The first one is that we want to be a community wealth building council. We want it to be everything that we do through a community wealth building lens. And we want that to be the case for anchor institutions within Ayrshire as well. On procurement, the public sector in Ayrshire spends £1 billion a year procuring goods and services. And what we're saying is, yes, we want to spend more of that money with Ayrshire-based companies, but we also want to spend more of that money with those generative forms of businesses that Neil was speaking about, so cooperatives, social enterprises, worker-owned businesses, etc. And we also want to see procurement as a means to support our net zero carbon ambitions. Fair employment, what we're saying there is that North Ayrshire Council is the biggest employer within our area, and that means that we have significant power as that employer. It's also the case that the NHS is the biggest employer across the whole of the Ayrshire region. So again, them as a public body have huge influence over the labour market. And that influence and power gives us the opportunity to, for example, tailor recruitment policies to groups who are disadvantaged and struggle to get into the labour market, so we can target them towards people with disabilities or people who care for people with disabilities. We can target it towards single parents, etc., all with the intention of trying to lift people out of poverty and give them a much better start in life. As employers, we can also offer modern apprentices, but we can also offer the opportunity for career progression, just to make sure that our local citizens actually have the opportunity to unlock their potential. And finally, I think as the biggest employers within the local and regional economy, we have the ability to influence and set the standard for pay and terms and conditions across the wider region, and that is certainly our intention in North Ayrshire and indeed across Ayrshire. Neil spoke about land and assets, so you've got procurement, which is a monetary asset and lever, but we also own tons of land and loads of buildings, and we need to see the real value, economic and social value of those assets. So because of austerity over the last 10 years, local councils have been pursuing what is mostly called property rationalisation strategies, seeing those assets as something to sell off, get a capital receipt, and then just smooth out the budget from year to year, or indeed take the capital receipt and use it to finance the capital investment programme. What we're saying is we need to lift our ambition on that. We need to see the true social value of our land and assets. I'm having a bit of bother here. Can you still see it?
Yeah, we can still see the slide. It hasn't moved on.
Right, sorry, it came up a wee sign saying I had a connection problem, so hopefully it's still... So
Hi Joe, are you still here? Or have you just turned your webcam off? It looks like we've
We see it as that sort of capital receipt.
Hi Joe, we just lost you for a wee minute there. Just as you said that your connection had gone, it seemed to cut you off. If you wouldn't mind just repeating what you just said.
Sorry about this. No, so I'm just saying that we need to see the true value of our land and assets, and that might mean that we transfer some of it to the community to put back into socially productive use. It might mean that we use it to aid our fight against climate change, but we certainly don't just see it as something to sell off and get a capital receipt. We want to see it used and put into socially productive use for the betterment of our communities. Financial pillar, we have two sort of longer term actions within that. One is to establish a community bank, as Neil spoke about. That would be a mutually owned community bank, owned by its customers, able to use its customers' deposits to create fresh finance that can be invested within a wider regional economy. It would have to be a sort of region the size of sort of the west of Scotland. That's because it is going to be fully licensed by the Bank of England, and therefore they need to be comfortable that it is a sustainable banking model. The second sort of longer term pillar or action within that pillar is that we want to see Strathclyde Pension Fund invest more locally. We want to see them invest within the regional economy that their members live and work and they serve. At the minute, the pension fund tends to delegate huge swathes of money to global financial investment managers and ask them to invest it on their behalf. And if you look at what's happened with community wealth building in other areas, such as Preston, the pension fund has been used to invest within the sort of local and regional economy, provide sort of economic and social benefits to the region, as well as provide a financial return to the fund and its members. So we are really keen to sort of establish that principle of direct local investment with Strathclyde Pension Fund. And the fifth pillar is about plural ownership. It's about supporting that more democratic economy, social enterprises, cooperatives, worker-owned businesses. And one of the key sort of actions within that for us in North Ayrshire is that we would like to transition family-owned businesses to worker ownership. And the reason for that is that the North Ayrshire and Ayrshire economy suffered through the deindustrialisation in the 1980s. We never really recovered. But through that period, family-owned businesses basically became the backbone of our local and regional economy. But so few of them have succession plans in place. And that's not just a risk to the business, but it's a risk to the wider regional economy and our labour market. And therefore, we think that the time is right for us to start those conversations about those family-owned businesses' succession plans and whether or not a transition to worker ownership would work for them and the regional economy. And we have examples of how that's already happened in North Ayrshire through such as the Granny resort on the Isle of Arran, which transitioned to worker ownership a year or so ago. So we've been on this journey for 2 years, launched a strategy in May, starting to see some community wealth building in practice in North Ayrshire now, changed the way that we do our procurement. So in terms of quick quotes, so those contracts which are below the threshold for competitive tendering for goods and works, we now have a different process for quick quotes, which involves our business support team going out and looking at the local market, trying to see which businesses can actually supply or undertake that contract on behalf of the council, and making sure that there's opportunities for those businesses to get it. And we're seeing some successes through that. Those contracts which are a bit bigger and are above the threshold for competitive tendering, what we're doing is we're getting the business development team involved at a much earlier stage. We're doing wave planning, so looking ahead 2, 3, 4 years about what the procurement needs of the council will be. And the business development team go out and animate the local market. They see what the local supply chain can offer, and they make sure that any businesses within that local supply chain who are able to sort of undertake that contract are able to bid, and they'll support them through the application process, but also support them to be competitive when they do. And that, I think, is the most important sort of bit of procurement now for us in North Ayrshire. It's not just a technocratic process of scoring a tender when the results come back in. It's actually about looking at the local supply chain and looking for opportunities. And where there is gaps, or where we identify gaps over the longer term, there's the opportunity then to try and create new enterprises to fill those gaps. And that's what's happened in Preston and Cleveland, where yes, have started to spend more of the procurement money within the local and regional economies, but they've also set up worker cooperatives, looking at how they can create new democratic enterprises to fill the gaps that they do have. Other examples of community wealth building practice in North Ayrshire are about how we're using our community investment fund for local groups to take ownership of land and buildings. A couple of examples on that screen there, the Free Towns Growers, for example, in Ardrossan, get investment from our community investment fund, and they are looking to set up a training hub at the facility for the community. We have a project at the Salkits train station where a community group have taken ownership of part of the station, and they have got money for the community investment fund to convert that into a karate training station. We've got a project in the Isle of Cumbrae where a group are looking to restore Millport Town Hall, and again supported through the community investment fund that we established in 2017, and also successful in the first round for the Scottish Government's Capital and Regeneration Grant Fund. So hopefully that will be a successful project as well. And we're also seeing how we're putting it into practice through stuff like empty buildings within our town centres. We have now started to acquire some privately owned sort of buildings within our town centres with the view to converting them to council housing as part of our community wealth building work. Next steps for us in North Ayrshire, we have almost completed the recruitment of 9 new community wealth building roles. They will sit between business support, regeneration, and also a development manager who will sit and do that piece of work, joining the dots and the links between procurement and the business support team. I think, as Geraldine said at the start, we have launched in the last couple of weeks an anchor charter. All the big public institutions in Ayrshire, so the 3 councils, the NHS Ayrshire Nairn Health Board, Ayrshire College and Scottish Enterprise, have all signed the anchor charter and have made commitments across the 5 pillars of community wealth building, but also a 6th pillar that we added, which is their contribution towards our efforts to reach net zero by 2030. We have also established an expert advisory panel, and Neil is one of the members of that panel, and the expert panel is really challenging us on the policy and ambitions behind our community wealth building work. So the Commission looks at the practice, but the expert panel very much keeping us on the sort of ambitious trajectory that we've set out within the strategy. And the final bit on that slide there is the Ayrshire growth deal. So there is a £3 million pot of money within our growth deal for community wealth building, but we see the growth deal as a £250 million community wealth building opportunity. Every project in that growth deal needs to be seen through the lens of community wealth building, so that it's not the traditional extractive model of inward investment, but instead is a more generative and inclusive model of a growth deal, which actually sees the benefits land within the communities for those communities and indeed our local citizens. We're seeing how this strategy that we launched in May is preparing us for the recession that we are now in. We are starting to see how it starts to mould our thinking around other strategies in our day-to-day operation. And by launching it in May, it's allowed us to prepare for the recovery, the economic recovery and renewal process. And in the last couple of months, my cabinet have agreed a economic recovery and renewal approach, which has the twin pillars of community wealth building and our net zero ambitions. We're using a £8.8 million investment fund we created within the budget in March, which was financed through refinancing our loans as a council. And we're using that now to invest in a local Green New Deal. We're investing it in municipally owned renewable energy generation, which will bring an income stream to the council. We're investing it in a tree planting programme. We're investing it in a green jobs fund. We've set up a new community wealth building business fund, so that will now look at helping those distressed businesses through the COVID pandemic, but will also help facilitate and enable the transition to create new social enterprises and cooperatives, etc. And that, I think, is a fairly ambitious, I think as Neil would agree, renewal and recovery approach we've set out. And just finally, last slide, it's just to reiterate what Neil said, that this is not a community empowerment initiative. This is an intentional approach to reorientate the economy, to transfer and redirect wealth and control away from that extractive traditional neoliberal model and towards local local communities and the economy. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Hopefully you were able to see that throughout. I know I had a connection problem, but happy to spend the next 20 minutes answering questions.
Thanks. And Neil, for interesting presentations there. Are you both happy to share your slides? We've had that asked. That's great. So we now have time for questions. We are looking to finish at 10:30. I know that the webinar had said it was going to be 9:30 till 11, but we had planned on it just being an hour webinar. So if you have any questions, please use the questions tab and go to webinar. So I've got a question for you, Joe. How have communities responded to the engagement on community wealth building?
Okay, thanks, Lynn. My webcam says it's trying to connect, so apologies that you probably can't see me at the minute. But the communities are really interested in what we're trying to achieve here. I've had a long sort of engagement with some of the third sector with a really successful sort of presentation to a third sector conference in Ayrshire last year, and that sort of spiked and triggered some further interest for the sector. But I think as well as that, having went into lockdown in March, we had to change the way that we launched the strategy. We had booked a venue in Irvine to launch it. We would have had about 100 invited guests along at that launch, but we couldn't do that because we were in lockdown. So we turned that into an online launch. We streamed it live on Facebook, and rather than having 100 people in a room, we had over 11,000 views of the launch and a great level of engagement from local residents. And I think that's spiked the interest again within the local communities, having ongoing discussions with groups across North Ayrshire, including on our islands, where we are now looking at recruiting a senior officer for the islands to take forward community wealth building on Arran and Cumbria. And part of their job will be to develop a 2030 economic vision for both islands, working alongside the island communities to do that. So really good engagement. I think a lot of people are excited and encouraged by some of the ideas around about it, and can see the opportunities for them to finally break free from the sort of deindustrial decline that we've suffered since the 1980s and start to put Ayrshire back on the map.
That's great, thanks. Had a couple of questions about the Strathclyde Pension Fund. So what work, if any, has Joe done with Strathclyde Pension Fund? But we also had a comment, and I'll just read it to you. I'm the Vice Chair of Strathclyde Pension Fund and leading on community wealth building in Glasgow, and would be happy to discuss this with you as it is a conversation we are having in Glasgow at the minute. So I will give you their details at the end of the webinar, but just the question is, what work have you done with Strathclyde Pension Fund so far?
Okay, that would be great if you could put us in touch and we can have a conversation around that. We have met with some of the officers at Strathclyde Pension Fund since we launched the strategy. We're in a pretty difficult position with Strathclyde Pension Fund, to be honest, as a local authority, given that the committee is run by Glasgow City Council and its membership is wholly Glasgow City councillors, and also the board has employee representatives, so representatives from 3 of the councils, but it's the 3 biggest councils, and North Ayrshire isn't one of those. So our engagement with the pension fund over a number of years has been pretty minimal. So that conversation since we launched the strategy was to open up a discussion around the opportunities to finance and take forward community wealth building and the pension fund to support that. I've got to say that probably didn't get the best of receptions from the first conversation. Asked about direct local investment, and I was told that it's too labour intensive, resource intensive for the fund, and the model that they currently pursue is that delegation of huge swathes of cash to global financial investment arms who invest it on their behalf. But I think that needs to be challenged, it needs to be looked at, and we need to be looking at how we use that fund to create a more vibrant and fair and inclusive economy across the whole of the Strathclyde area. And I think Neil would probably agree with that. I think some of your reports, Neil, with CLES have described sort of public pension funds as reservoirs of local wealth. And I absolutely agree with that, because it is the members and their employers' contributions that make up that money. And I think it could just be invested in a different way, which provided benefits throughout that workers' working life, rather than just waiting for a deferred salary payment as part of their retirement.
That's great. Neil, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, obviously we're moving to a global depression, and the whole investment markets will change. At the end of the day, the public sector pensions funds, it's your cleaners, it's your workers on the front line, and they need to be looked after. And so there's something called fiduciary responsibility, which need to make return. But it is all changing, and I would say to any public sector pension fund to implore upon your advisors that advise your pension funds to actually think creatively and imaginatively about return. If it's pots of funds that are suboptimal, a little bit below what you'd expect in return, then I think you need to consider that, because some of the local investments are much more secure and less risky than you would imagine. So I think the pension community, including the pension advisors who advance public sector pension funds, need to lift their head up and start to see what we're moving into, and start being more creative and imaginative about what they invest that local wealth in.
That's great. Neil, I actually have a question for you. You have done work with APSE before about the value of the local pound. Do you see this as an opportunity to enhance the local economy and sustain local employment?
Yes, we did work with APSE, good friends of ours, for a number of reports. In fact, some of this work started way back in 2007 or 8, I think, with APSE, when we measured the public pound. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we need to, in this pandemic more than ever, to ensure that every single pound that we have is utilised to get the good or service we require, of course, but is maxed to the hilt in terms of local employment, local enterprises, and making sure that pound works really hard and the multiplier effect. So there was pressure on before with austerity. There's now even more pressure. And interestingly, because of the decline in the economy, the public money has more, it has more, a bigger percentage. So if it was typically 35% of the whole economy in terms of public sector resources, that's more a percentage now because of the decline in the commercial economy. So we really, really need to make that work extraordinarily hard. In Scotland, of course, and many of the local authorities listening in have a great track record in thinking about their own money and their own pound and how it relates to community benefits.
That's great. So how do you replace the income from, say, selling off council properties needed to balance budgets in order to create community wealth building investment?
Joe will have a comment on that for sure. I mean, this is a tricky old business here. When you're faced with the need to get receipts in to deal with further investment or to help with services, I do think, again, it's the imagination here, the longer term elements of what is valuable. And we need to be patient here. I think we need to think about the wider envelope of value, not just the financial return value, but the local economic value, the social value, the cultural value, the ecological value, the well-being value. And let's say take a piece of land that's for development and it's going to be sold off. Let's think about that land now with this pandemic. We need space. We'll need public spaces. We'll need to think creatively about urban food growing. We'll need to think about a whole range of different things with our land. And so in that respect, I think we just need to be creative and imagine and think through not just the short-term return, but the longer-term return to our society, our community and the environment.
Yeah, I would just add to what Neil says. He's absolutely spot on. We need to see the true economic and social value of it rather than just the monetary value of it. But I think one of the Neil's slide had frequently asked questions, and I think one of the ones that you probably never mentioned, Neil, was the often cited criticism that this is still just managing austerity at a local level and thinking a wee bit more imaginatively about how to do that. And I suppose that does raise the question about whether or not this is just a means to sort of shift the cuts down to local government and we'll manage them. I think fundamentally, I think we need to see better budgets, fairer budget settlements for local government if we are to see the true value of community wealth building. But what I would also say is we just need to think about how we can use those land and assets to generate alternative income streams. So as I said in my slide about our sort of investment fund, we can use the land and assets that we own to invest in renewable energy generation, for example, and then that brings in an income stream which helps the council's budget going forward. We can either use that income to set a budget and balance it, or we can look to invest it further within the local and regional economy. And I think that's where we need to be thinking a wee bit more imaginatively about how we start to raise some more income for ourselves. Under the plural ownership pillar, I mean, a number of reports have spoke about this from CLES and the Democracy Collaborative, but one of the most inclusive forms of ownership is municipal ownership. And we need to see, as we look at new sort of generative forms of businesses being set up, we need to consider municipal enterprise as part of that, and whether or not there is ways and means for a local council to start to think differently about how they operate in a way that can actually generate more income for them as well to invest within the local area. So I think the budget is certainly a challenge, but it's about how you prioritise the budget, I suppose, and also how you think a wee bit differently and a wee bit more imaginatively and how you handle it.
Yeah, that's great. Related kind of to the budgets, what has the reaction of Scottish Government and UK Government to the wide-ranging proposals? Is ring fencing by governments restricting your ambitions? And who have you been consulting with at Scottish Government? So you can maybe just say about any departments or anywhere.
Maybe Geraldine want to come in here at this point, but I would say that, you know, we're consulting quite widely across the Scottish Government, and, you know, and I'm new to the Scottish Government, I would say is that I'm seeing an openness to see what might need to flex as regards community wealth building across areas of government policy. And I suppose it's, I see flex. I think there is no inertia there. There's perhaps a questioning of how community wealth building fits into a range of other policies. But I think that's a work in progress, I would say. I mean, there is, I think there's a common sense understanding of community wealth building and what it can deliver. And that common sense is starting to penetrate a whole range of different bits of government policy. I don't know, Geraldine's maybe got a more insightful understanding of community wealth building's fit inside the Scottish Government policy. Geraldine? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I don't know about insightful, but
it will be.
But certainly, the fact that we've got Neil in working with us to advise us on community wealth building is a significant appointment, and I think it's symbolic of the government's commitment to explore this very genuinely. I think the other thing that's worth highlighting, and Neil's been along to speak to this group, is that we have quite a senior official level anyway, set up a kind of internal governance structure, which includes kind of director level representation across a whole range of different policy areas that have an interest. And I think what community wealth building has done is it's kind of forced us to have a slightly different conversation, and to engage in a slightly different way, and to think about how, even if it's kind of inadvertently, some policies maybe don't support some of the outcomes that we want to deliver, and have quite a serious conversation about what we need to change to enable that. And I think the place work allows us to have that conversation in a more meaningful way, because we're actually talking about real life issues and real life places, and what that means, and that flushes out quite a lot of challenges. So I think the work that Neil's talked about in terms of the places will force us to continue to have those conversations, and if there are messages back to national government, then I think Neil's right. I think we're prepared to hear them.
That's great. We're still getting a lot of questions in, so I'm just trying to maybe start grouping them, because I'm conscious I don't want to miss anyone's questions. So there's a question about are you engaging with community councils, tenants group, etc.? And I think that'll be for you, Joe. And similarly, will not real localism potentially harm some areas? For example, if Glasgow sees local as Glasgow and not the wider area. So if you wouldn't mind answering them, Joe.
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, yeah, I mean, it's a whole range of community groups that we are engaging with. We have been doing presentations to a number of community development trusts within the area, first sector groups, just made an offer to some community councils to do the presentation as well. We've done the presentation to our locality partnerships in North Ayrshire, so done a lot of community engagement on the sort of agenda. In terms of the comment about localism, I think that's dealt with by what Neil had said about protectionism, but I would go a wee bit further on that and say that our intention in North Ayrshire was never for us to compete with East and South, or to compete with Inverclyde or Renfrewshire, and say that we're going to take all of that spend and bring it back into North Ayrshire. Our intention is to try and make sure that North Ayrshire businesses are competitive and able to beat those multinational companies, those ones who are based hundreds of miles away from where we are, and to win some of those contracts and bring the money back to that local economy. If you look at what happened in Cleveland, that's what they've been successful in doing. So they came together as anchor institutions, started to spend more local money, then they set up the Evergreen Cooperatives Network. It's a range of worker-owned cooperatives that was established to fill some of the supply chain gaps that they had within the city. And one of those worker-owned cooperatives is a laundry service, and they recently bet Sodexo to the laundry contract for the big health institution within Cleveland. And that's exactly what community wealth building's about. It's not about protectionism, it's about reorientating the economy so that the wealth that we have within our levers as a public sector is used to create a more fair and inclusive economy. And if everybody's on this agenda in Scotland, then it can only be a good thing, because the economy will be much fairer and more inclusive than the current extractive model that we've got.
That's great, thanks. What is being used to measure success over the long term for these pilot projects, and how will community enterprises become self-sufficient and free from public sector funding?
Yeah, I mean, each of the areas, and there's dozens of areas across the UK doing it, each of the area has a bespoke set of sort of outcomes across those 5 pillars with a short, medium and long term sort of framing. In Scotland, of course, we've got the inclusive growth diagnostic, and we've got a range of different aspirations in the nation. And I think what we'll be doing was be dovetailing in community wealth building activity to those wider local and national aspirations. In terms of community enterprises and plural ownership models more generally, there is targets in terms of what you would expect to see in terms of the growth of those sectors and their economic contribution to that locality. So there is inbuilt aspirations about increasing that form of ownership models within the economy, as well as increasing their contribution to the economy. So community enterprises of all its forms, or the social economy of all its forms, are key to this. Inclusive ownership is so important because that is a ready-made way by which you lock in wealth, a ready-made way that you can accrue wider community benefits. And so they sit at the heart of this, and as well as municipal forms of ownership too, and places that are really resilient around the world, places that have higher levels of social inclusion, they do have a high preponderance of those types of entities. So Portland in Oregon, for instance, has a high proportion of that form of ownership model, and it's one of the fairest cities in the US. So there is clearly correlation between that plural, diverse set of inclusive ownership with a both burgeoning economy, but also a fair and just one.
That's great, Neil. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Joe has to leave in a minute or two to go down on a presentation. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I will be sharing them with the panelists, and they can kind of continue them offline, because I think some of them are really interesting. Miriam, would you like to just round up for us?
Yeah, just be very quick, and I just want to say thank you so much to Geraldine and Neil and Joe for joining us today, and this has given us a really great insight into what community wealth building is, the opportunities that are available in Scotland. It's dispelled some of the myths. I thought that was really good with the FAQs, Neil. I thought, because those are things that people say, and actually it's good to challenge that, because it isn't just about everything we're doing, because what we were doing already didn't work clearly. So we need to think about how something like community wealth building could make economies work locally better. I think that you've given us some really good practical examples, Joe, which is fantastic, of how you would actually deliver community wealth building locally, and we'll be getting more and more examples as the other councils and the other areas are looking at this, and I think that's a really great thing, that spread from a city region to cities as well through their growth deal, because I think there's clear correlation in terms of economic recovery and renewal into community wealth building, and how the growth deals can be developed and be made more inclusive, because certainly colleagues at Glasgow City Region had said community wealth building wasn't really on the radar when they set that up, but now they're kind of trying to retrofit it. But if you can build it in now, then that makes a bigger difference going forward. So I think that's really important. We can learn from all these different areas. I think that idea of disruption and challenge and the opportunities for recovery and renewal in the current circumstance that we have is really, really important, because we have this opportunity to reset the economy given what's been happening around COVID-19 and this massive negative impact on local economies. So we've got that opportunity now within this disruption to continue that disruption and make differences and be innovative and be creative. I think that's really important as well. We will, just for practically speaking, we're going to share the webinar shortly once we've got them all ready for sharing, and we'll share the slides from Neil and Joe as well. And we want to keep the conversation going and to learn from each other. So through SLADE, the Scottish Local Authorities Economic Development Group, we will continue our conversations about community wealth building. It's factoring into a lot of the discussions that we're having between local government, Scottish Government and the national agencies, and I think it's something that's really key to that economic recovery and renewal. So it'll be really important to keep those conversations going. But thank you so much for everybody attending today and listening to the webinar, and thank you again to Neil, Joe and Geraldine for your time this morning. It's great. Thanks very much.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Miriam.
Okay, thanks, and yeah, we'll be in touch. Okay, cheers.
Bye-bye.